A cruel commerce, the transatlantic slave trade. The transatlantic slave trade stands as a stark reminder of humanity's capacity for cruelty and inhumanity. For centuries, millions of Africans were ripped from their homes and families, torn apart by the ruthless hands of traders. They were transported across the Atlantic in horrific conditions, packed tightly into ships, their destination, the Americas. This forced migration was driven by greed and the insatiable desire for profit. European powers, hungry for wealth and labor, built vast empires on the backs of enslaved Africans, exploiting their labor. The slave trade left an indelible mark on the world, reshaping economies and societies. Its legacy continues to shape societies today, influencing social and economic structures. The transatlantic slave trade was not the first instance of slavery in human history. However, it was unique in its scale and brutality, unmatched in its sheer inhumanity. It was a system built on dehumanization, stripping Africans of their dignity and humanity. Africans were deemed less than human, treated as mere commodities to be bought and sold. This allowed traders to justify their horrific actions, cloaking their greed in a veneer of false righteousness. The trade had a profound impact on Africa, altering its course forever. It destabilized societies, fueled conflict and decimated populations, leaving scars that remain to this day. The loss of human potential was immeasurable, a tragic consequence of this dark chapter in history. Seeds of enslavement. How greed and power fueled a trade in human lives, a dark chapter in human history. The transatlantic slave trade was driven by a complex interplay of factors, including economic interests and racial ideologies. At its core was the insatiable greed of European powers who sought to maximize their wealth and influence. The Americas, newly colonized, promised vast riches and untapped resources. These riches, however, relied on a large and cheap labor force which was brutally exploited. Sugarcane, tobacco and cotton plantations demanded backbreaking labor, often under inhumane conditions. European powers saw in Africa a source of this labor ripe for exploitation. The continent's proximity and the existing slave trade within Africa made it an easy target for European traders. The demand for slaves in the Americas increased dramatically throughout the 17th and 18th centuries, driven by the booming plantation economy. This demand was met with a ready supply from Africa, where captives were taken by force. Local rulers, often complicit in the trade, exchanged captives for European goods, perpetuating the cycle of violence. Guns, textiles and alcohol became the currency of human lives, traded for the bodies and souls of men, women and children. The slave trade became deeply entrenched in the global economy, shaping the destinies of continents. It fueled the rise of industrial capitalism in Europe and the Americas, leaving a legacy of exploitation and inequality. Section 5, the British Paradox, Abolition and the Lingering Legacy of Empire.
Great Britain played a complex and contradictory role in the transatlantic slave trade. For centuries, it was a leading slave-trading nation. British ships transported millions of Africans to the Americas, contributing significantly to the brutal and inhumane system.
However, in the late 18th century, a growing abolitionist movement began to challenge the morality of slavery. Led by figures like William Wilberforce, the movement gained momentum. It eventually succeeded in abolishing the slave trade in 1807, marking a significant turning point in history.
Britain's role in the abolition of the slave trade is often celebrated. However, it is crucial to acknowledge the complexities. Britain's economy had benefited enormously from the slave trade. Even after abolition, Britain continued to profit from the system of slavery in its colonies, reaping economic benefits at the expense of human suffering.
The legacy of empire and colonialism continued to shape Britain's relationship with Africa long after the formal end of the slave trade. The impacts of these historical actions are still felt today, influencing socio-economic and political dynamics across the continent. Section 6. Scars on the Soul, the Enduring Impact of Slavery on Africa.
The transatlantic slave trade had a devastating and long-lasting impact on Africa. The loss of millions of people, primarily young and able-bodied, had a profound demographic impact. It created labor shortages and hindered economic development.
The slave trade also fueled conflict and instability. It undermined traditional social structures and contributed to the rise of slave-raiding states.
The psychological and cultural impact of the slave trade was equally profound. It created a legacy of trauma and loss that continues to resonate today. The forced dispersal of Africans to different parts of the Americas resulted in the creation of new African diaspora communities.
These communities have preserved elements of African culture and identity, even as they have adapted to new environments.
Section 7. Echoes of Injustice. The Slave Trade and Modern-Day Inequality. The transatlantic slave trade may be a historical event, but its legacy continues to shape the world today. The systemic racism and inequality that were used to justify slavery continue to manifest in various forms. The economic disparities between developed and developing nations are, in part, a consequence of the historical exploitation of Africa and other parts of the world. Understanding the history of the slave trade is crucial for understanding the roots of these contemporary issues. It highlights the enduring legacy of colonialism and the ways in which historical injustices continue to shape the present. Acknowledging this legacy is essential for working towards a more just and equitable world.
Section 8. Remembering to learn lessons from a dark past for a brighter future. The transatlantic slave trade serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of greed, prejudice, and the abuse of power. It is a history that we must never forget. Remembering this dark chapter is not about dwelling on the past. It is about learning from it and ensuring that such atrocities are never repeated. It is about recognizing the resilience of the human spirit, even in the face of unimaginable cruelty. The lessons of the slave trade are as relevant today as they were centuries ago. We must remain vigilant against all forms of exploitation and discrimination. We must challenge injustice wherever we see it. We must work towards a world where every human being is treated with dignity and respect. Section 9. The urgency of now fighting modern slavery and human trafficking. While the transatlantic slave trade has ended, slavery itself has not. Millions of people around the world are still trapped in various forms of modern slavery. These include forced labor, debt bondage, sex trafficking, and forced marriage. The fight against slavery is far from over. It requires a global effort to address the root causes of exploitation and to bring perpetrators to justice. It is our collective responsibility to raise awareness about modern slavery. We must support organizations working to combat it. We must hold governments accountable for upholding the rights of all people. By working together, we can create a world where freedom from slavery is a reality for all. Section 10. Towards a just future, building a world without exploitation. The transatlantic slave trade stands as a stark reminder of humanity's capacity for both great evil and great good. It is a history that challenges us to confront the darkest aspects of our past and to strive for a better future. It reminds us that the fight for justice and equality is an ongoing process. By remembering the victims of slavery, by learning from the mistakes of the past, and by working towards a more equitable world, we can honor the memory of those who suffered and create a future where all people are free to live with dignity and respect.